Hey there, everybody. Good evening. Welcome and getting everybody on. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
This is our last class before we go away. Stepping in and sitting down in the proper seat. We've got so last night we did a screen of Soul Doctor. And what I didn't quite get was that Jewish communities around the country did a screening of that movie last night at exactly the same time. So there was one going on in Arizona, and I had friends that were watching it in different places. They were watching a movie, so it was an interesting movie. I don't think anybody online came to the movie last night, but was anybody there? I saw a few people that I knew there, but I don't see anybody who was on this group. Went to the movie last night, went to see Soul Doctor at the Lemley. We've got people coming in and sitting down.
I want to say hello.
There's
And
Joyce, everybody.
Hi, everybody.
Can you see her?
Can you see us?
Yeah.
No,
Well, we can't see-
no,
we
we're,
can't
we
see-
can, oh yeah, I can see you now. I see the top of your head. When I looked over to the left, but when I look at the camera, I see only a green light.
All
Hello,
right.
everybody. I love,
Joyce, can you see us?
Yeah,
yes, I can see
yeah,
you
we can
now.
see it.
Oh, you can.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah, we
We
can see it.
we don't see our
Wait, you don't
ourselves
see her?
in-
Wait,
we
hold
don't
on.
see us.
No,
I
we
can
see you.
Yes, yes, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I
Yeah, we
can
see
see
it.
you and
Yeah.
I'm here.
So we see you 100%.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure. Here, I can make everybody
We don't
see.
see. Oh,
There you
there it is.
So I think it's also what you guys choose to spotlight too. Sometimes, I don't know. I don't fully get it. But yeah, so we were saying we saw Soul Doctor, but nobody here was there. I was saying nobody here ended up going to see it. It was interesting. It was people who saw it liked it. As I was saying, it was going on, the screening was going on simultaneously at independent theaters around the country yesterday. So it was about Shlomo Karlebach. It was about his friendship with Nina Simone. It was interesting. People kind of thought it was kind of made up or something. And then at the end, they showed the archival footage of the actual relationship, friendship, and them singing together and stuff like that. It was pretty cool. It was a filming of the musical in 2018. So it wasn't a documentary, and it was more like if somebody filmed a musical, which I don't think ever looks that great, and it wasn't great quality, but it was a good story, and I think people enjoyed it. So the movie that we're screening tomorrow night, Persian Lessons, is also very limited release. Oh, and by the way, there was only 2 theaters in LA that they were showing Soul Doctor last night. And again, tomorrow it's the only, I think tomorrow might be the only theater that they're showing Persian Lessons. I don't understand what's going on with the screenings and why the movies are in such limited release, but for whatever reason, that's what they're doing. I don't know if they get like to show it once and they don't have to pay I don't want to speculate. I don't know what the method is here, but I do know that they don't have it screening a lot. And the rest of the movies at the Lemley are kind of, the Guardians of the Galaxy and the rest of those movies everybody seems to want to see. But and I'm not bagging on Guardians of the Galaxy. They have to make money. But I do want to tell you that at least we have these movies when they come, and I'll continue to be working with them and we'll be promoting and putting out there when the movie exists, because there were people who did not know that Soul Doctor was going on until they saw it on our Facebook page. So no, there was about 20 people, 25 people. So it wasn't like it wasn't empty, but I don't know how many people would have been there if we hadn't publicized it, that's for sure. So anyways, I don't know. We'll see. I think look, the theater holds like 50 or 60. No, I think it was actually in their larger theater. It was in their ground floor theater, their theater 1, which I think is their largest theater. So maybe it was a little bit larger, but there's a couple of people from the temple there. And since I knew Karlbach, it was kind of emotional for me to see the movie, to see that stuff go on screen was pretty moving, just because, you know, some of it was reminiscent of conversations or things that he talked to me about, or, you know, that I had conversations with. So anyway, so I didn't play it during the I haven't, well, I've shared it with some people. I'll play one thing for you before we start, since we have everybody here. I will play you just a piece of Karlbach speaking to me at the wall 41 years ago at my bar mitzvah. So I'm going to play just a bit so you can hear it. 1 second.
My grandfather, your great grandfather, would have given their whole life like to a mitzvah that should. Maybe look at you like it's nothing, walking around. But you know,
This is at the wall.
So holy, so special. Imagine it's Los Angeles, you grew up like everybody else, and here your father takes you to the holiest place in the world.
Okay, it's a little too hard to hear. So what he said is this place is so holy, right? It's like no other place in the world. And he goes on to tell me, he says, you know, I'd be lying to you if I tell you that Los Angeles isn't a beautiful place. Of course it's a beautiful place, but there's no place like this. And he said to me, you can walk 10 million miles away and you're still here. So yeah, it was pretty powerful. And yeah, I'll send you the audio. You can listen to it. It's about 4 minutes long, but you know.
So he's talking to you one-on-one?
At my bar mitzvah. So my bar mitzvah, I had a bar mitzvah at the wall with just my dad and my grandfather. It was the men's section. They didn't have the egalitarian section at the time. So it was just my dad and then he had a few of his followers, a few of his friends over there. So it was definitely a strange experience for a 13-year-old kid from the Valley. But and you can hear screaming in the background, you can hear people making noise, and it was pretty, like, you know, it's pretty amazing. And somehow we found the audio a couple of years ago. My dad recorded it. And so the weird thing about it too, I'll send you the audio. I'll send it around for people. But he said, one of the things he said is, you have to make sure one day you bring your sons, or, you know, bring your kids back to the wall for their bar mitzvahs, which I did. So I brought my girls back. So it was pretty powerful. So yeah, so it was pretty wild to have that audio and to hear that, and then to see him in the movie last night talking about it. It ends with him going to Austria to perform in a concert, and he sang Am Yisrael Chai. He sang the song he wrote about the Jewish people living, Am Yisrael Chai, and singing that song in Austria, where he was born. I mean, he was born in Vienna. He escaped in 1938, and so he went back to sing that song. So he was 11 years old, 9 years old, to New York.
How do you get in?
Because his dad was the chief rabbi of Vienna. They got him out. His dad was friends with, like, Sigmund Freud and stuff like that. He was pretty well
I
connected.
understand, but 38 was close.
The 38, 39, whatever, it was right at that. It was right after Kristallnacht. So it was maybe beginning of 39, maybe very end. It was right after Kristallnacht, I think, right after Kristallnacht. It was November. So he, man, they had a lot of pull. You know, there were people who could get out, but it was hard. It was almost impossible. But if you had a letter from, you know, Sigmund Freud, if you had a letter from Albert Einstein, you know, they would get people out of Germany and Austria. I mean, Freud had a lot of contacts in the government, and he had pull to get people out of Austria. And I have a letter. I bought a letter of Einstein where he tried to get, I don't know what happened. I should find out. He tried to get, the letter was him trying to get some guy out of Berlin, a professor. He's trying to get out of Berlin. We need this guy to come to America, whatever. I mean, I don't know if they really needed him, but he did it. He'd write letters for colleagues, try to get him out of Germany. So, yeah, but it was pretty hard. He needed some real pull. Anyways, but I'll send that the Karlbach audio. It was a good story, and it kind of told an important part of American Jewish history during the 60s, which was how do we reach Jews that are starting to assimilate, who are starting to move out of Jewish enclaves and starting to assimilate. And he was one of the pioneers of what we call Jewish outreach, we call Keruv, and he was one of the leaders of that. And he established a center in where you used to live in San Francisco. It's called the House of Love and Prayer. And it was right on the corner of Haight Ashbury.
Yes, I remember the house.
So that was Karlbach's attempt to try to get hippies and to try to get kids who were starting to drop whatever. So he got them right in the center of where they were in the Summer of Love. So anyways, those kids are now in their 70s and 80s. So they were pioneers. Anyways, so let's take a look. I don't know how much we're going to get to today. We're going to be really close to the end of Numbers when we finish today. I'm not going to rush, but we do have a couple of ideas here at the end of the book of Numbers that we're going to wrap up with. And they're kind of, some of them are things we've seen before, and some of them are just kind of almost like a hodgepodge of things that kind of finish up the book with. I mentioned to you when we read it about 10 chapters ago, there are two different, I would say lists, because it is a list and it's written, but we have two different lists of the trajectory of the route that the Israelites took out of Egypt into the land of Israel. We have one here that we're going to read today, and one that we read a few weeks ago. And so we have two slightly different journeys, which is why whenever you see a map of how the Israelites got into Egypt, they'll give you two different lines. They'll say, this is one possible way, and this is one possible way. The reason is because there's two different lines that are given in different parts of the book of Numbers. This is where it is, and in what we'll read today. So this is the end. The last two portions of Torah portions, the last two Torah portions of Numbers are Matot, Maseh, and we're in Matot, and then the Maseh we'll be reading today too. They're sometimes doubled up. They're sometimes read as a double portion. This year, we're going to be reading it. We almost got to the weekly Torah portion. We're going to be reading Matot, Maseh. We're going to be reading those Torah portions July 15th. We'll be reading Matot, Maseh as a double portion this year. So again, that's Numbers chapter 30 to 36, and we're in 31 right now. So you can see those last 6 chapters is what we're reading right now. So we're really close. It's kind of fitting as I'm ready to take off to Israel to be reading this and to be thinking about crossing into the promised land. Every time people ask me, do you ever get tired of going? I don't. I get tired there, and I get tired planning the trip, but I don't get tired of going. I never get tired of going, because I think about what Karlbach said about how many generations of our people dreamt about doing what I'm doing now, without much effort. So I think about thousands of, literally generations upon generations of Jews who I'm making the journey with every time I go. So who can only dream of what we're doing? So Moses is going to get some important news today, which is it's time for your job to come to an end. We heard about him passing on his energy to his replacement, to his successor, Joshua, and the fact that there is a transitional period where they're both for a few weeks still in power. They're both in power. Moses is still alive, and what we're reading about now is that in chapter 31 is that it says, God spoke to Moses saying, avenge the Israelite people on the Midianites, and then you shall be gathered into your kin. And again, what they're talking about here, the vengeance here is strange because it wasn't a war in the traditional sense, in the sense that, the Midianites came out and attacked us. They didn't want us there. It did say the Moabites, the Midianites, if you remember back with Balak, they tried to not let us pass through. But when they tried to curse us, that didn't work. And so instead they tried the very subtle and destructive way of luring us into idolatry and the Midianite, Moabite, orgy that happened where the Israelites participate in this idol worship, and there's a plague that kills a lot of the people, and Pinchas, gets in there and kills an Israelite and a Midianite woman. And so now the Midianites, Moses is supposed to wipe them out. As we mentioned before, this is a strange position to put Moses in because his wife is Midianite, or his first wife. We're not sure what happened to her, but Zipporah is a Midianite. We're not sure how she would have felt watching her family or her people be massacred as they're now ordered to be massacred. And it would have put a strange feeling maybe between Moses and his own sons, Gershom and Eleazar, who are half Midianite. So when God says to Moses, avenge the Israelite people on the Midianites and you shall be gathered into your kin, which is another way of saying you will die. This is your last act, if you will. There's a lot at stake here. So a lot of people don't talk about that. They don't talk about Moses's Midianite wife because quite frankly, I think people have always been a little uncomfortable with the fact that Moses was married to someone who wasn't an Israelite. I don't know what to tell you. The Torah says it. He's not the only person that's not married to an Israelite, because Joseph is married to an Egyptian, and Judah has a child with a Canaanite woman named Tamar, and a lot of people are married to people that are not Israelite. King David was married to non-Israelite women. His son Solomon was married to a lot of non-Israelite women. So it happens. It happened a lot. But it happened to Moses, and Moses is actually here ordered to kill his wife's people. We don't know whether Midianite clans or groups were very different from each other. It's possible the Midianites were kind of like Bedouin people who had very different tribal systems and clans where some of them would even be at war with each other. The Midianites may not have been like one nation that was, ruled by one king, that they could have been very much, we kind of imagine them based on the way the Torah describes them, that the Midianites are actually more like Bedouin people that are arranged more around a family or tribe rather than a nation. We don't really read much about Midianite kings, though there are some, but it doesn't seem like that's their structure. That's not their hierarchy. They don't seem to be living in cities. They seem to be living in tents. And everything that we see seems to indicate that they're more like a Bedouin people that sometimes settles in amongst the people. But, that's the way Moses discovers Zipporah and her family, Yitro. They're living in the desert. They're getting water out, out of a well. They don't seem to be living in a city. They're pasturing flock. But it's difficult to know for sure. But we do know that Moses, as one of his last acts, is told to wipe them out, or at least this group of Midianites. And so it says, Moses spoke to the militia saying, and again, the note here says militia because it says it literally means the people. Let troops be picked out from among you for a campaign, and let them fall upon Midian to wreak Adonai's vengeance on Midian. So it seems pretty clear that Moses is saying, this is God's command. You shall dispatch on the campaign 1,000 from every one of the tribes of Israel, which would be 12,000. So 1,000 from each tribe was furnished from the divisions of Israel, 12,000 picked for the campaign. Moses dispatched them on the campaign, 1,000 from each tribe, with Pinchas, the son of Eleazar, serving as priest on the campaign, equipped with sacred utensils and the trumpets for sounding the blasts. So it says sacred utensils. Maybe it's Urim, maybe it's something else that the priests used. It does not seem to be the Ark of the Covenant, but something maybe that was around the Ark of the Covenant, but not the Ark of the Covenant. And they also have Hatzotzrot, which are not shofars, they're trumpets. That's why it says trumpets, because they're metal. They're not made out of ram's horn, but it's more of a battle trumpet. They took the field against Midian, as Adonai had commanded Moses, and slew every male. That's what it says. Everyone was killed. Along with their other victims, they slew the kings of Midian. And here it says that there are kings, right? So it says that there are kings. Doesn't say that there's one king either, by the way, which probably indicates that these are more like tribal heads rather than kings of a city. But we don't know for sure. I'm not going to say that for sure, but it does seem to indicate that. But let's look what happens. Avi, Rechem, Sur, Hur, and Reba, the 5 kings of Midian. So that's pretty important. And then they also put Balaam, son of Beor, to sword. So right here it says that Balaam was killed in this campaign. So we read about Balaam, this prophet who was supposed to curse us, but instead blesses us, gives us the motto of Vu. How does it end for him? It ends with him dying. It ends with him being killed. That's how Balaam meets his end, according to the Bible. So Balaam, it doesn't say it in the text. And so what we're left with here is this idea. And by the way, let's just see if there's a good Rashi commentary that I can share with you here about Balaam. Should be one translation I could say here. Here it is. He came against Israel, exchanging his meteor, the sword for their meteor, the mouth. For they conquer only through their mouth, métier, actually, their French word, through their mouth, through prayer and petition. And he came and availed himself of their craft to curse them with his mouth. They therefore also came against him and exchanged their craft for the craft of heathen people who came with a sword. They're basically saying, why did they kill him with a sword? Because that was the exchange for what he did, which was try to come at them with his curses. That was his weapon, and we came at him with our weapon. What's interesting, of course, is that the last time we left him, he seemed to be okay. Like he went away going, hey, I told you from the very beginning, this is all I could do, whatever God told me. It didn't really seem like this was the way he was going to die. And so the Midrash has a bunch of stuff that we don't have, which is that Balaam was the one who instigated the sexual situation, in that he told the Midianites how to do this. Remember, he's not Midianite either. He's not Moabite. He's from the east, but he is a wizard. He's powerful. He knows things. He knows God, and he knows maybe our weaknesses. And so what he told the Midianites is, hey, it's not going to work for us to curse these guys. God is not going to let it happen. But if we get to them through sex, if we get to them through that, we can undermine them. And so Balaam uses his knowledge, his inside information, to help weaken us. And so he is killed for this. That's why Balaam dies. So Balaam is seen as the ultimate wizard. He's seen as the ultimate example of someone who has power. The Torah, the rabbis never deny that Balaam is powerful. It's always taken it at face value that he has powers, that he uses God's name, unfortunately, to do bad things, but that he has the power to do that. So Balaam becomes the stereotypical wizard, the prophet, or really more of a warlock or wizard who uses powers, energy, divine energy to do bad things. So when people ask me, do the rabbis or does the Torah say that magic doesn't work? No, it doesn't say that magic doesn't work. It just says you're not supposed to do it. And if you're doing it, and if you're invoking God's name for your own purposes, you're going to wind up like this guy. You're eventually going to die. And God will punish you for doing it. So there is a comeuppance for Balaam. So Balaam is never seen as even though he says Ma Tovu, even though he says this beautiful prayer, he is seen as somebody who misappropriated and didn't do the right thing with the power that they have. It's very hard, by the way, when you're reading the Midrash, to know always if they're talking about Balaam. And I saved this for now, so that you could see how Balaam ended, for me to tell you another important part of Midrash, and it's in the Talmud. Sometimes Balaam is referred to in the text, and they're not talking about Balaam. It's a code word. So we're never really sure in the Midrash, unless it says specifically something about the Moabites or the Midianites. You want to guess who they think, who they sometimes equate Balaam with? Anybody want to guess who the rabbis will equate him with? Anybody? I'll show you. Actually. And nobody wants to field a guess. Don't be shy. Don't be shy. Who do you think? I just told you. He's considered the ultimate wizard. And he uses his powers. And that's a good one, though. Anybody? Here. I'll share with you.
Jesus. Wow.
Yeah. So, yep. So, sometimes we don't know whether they are, when they're talking about, Balaam, it's sometimes a code that they use for Jesus.
For Jesus.
So what happens is that when people, probably in the ancient world, would come forward to the rabbis and say, well, what about these things where Jesus does these miracles, does these wonders? And they wouldn't get in an argument with them. They wouldn't say, that couldn't have happened. They wouldn't say, well, he couldn't have raised anybody from the dead. They wouldn't say that. I mean, who can say? What they did say was this. So did Balaam.
Ah.
So they said, but they used God's name. So did Balaam. So it became an acceptable way of kind of saying, well, even if he did, he wasn't supposed to be doing it. And when you're not doing magic for the purpose of what God wants you to do, when you're going rogue, when you're doing it on your own, that's what happens. So they wouldn't get into an argument of saying, well, he never really did it. They didn't do that. They just said, so did Balaam. So that became, and some people think that one of the reasons why Balaam was used as a code word was so that they wouldn't upset a Christian audience. So that if they threw out the name Balaam, it wouldn't get anyone upset. Which is why sometimes the rabbis they also would call the Roman emperor Nebuchadnezzar, and everyone knew they weren't talking about Nebuchadnezzar, they were talking about Nero, or they were talking about whatever the Caesar was at the time, Hadrian, whoever it was. They would say, oh yeah, like Nebuchadnezzar. And then everyone knew they're not talking about Nebuchadnezzar who lived 600 years ago. They're talking about the Romans. So using code names and using words when they would do that in place of things, we know that they did it, the rabbis did it, and it was not, and Christians did it too, when they wanted to talk about stuff that was, the most famous code that is it's not clear whether it's Jewish or Christian. We actually talked about the book of Revelations yesterday on Tuesday in our class yesterday. We talked about Revelations. Look, the number that everybody knows, the number of the beast, 666, is actually a coded reference to Emperor Nero. We know that now, and we're pretty sure that that's what it is. But it's a coded reference, and it's using numerology. It's using Jewish numbers, what we call gematria, to put a code out there that wouldn't upset certain people, or actually most people, but everyone else would know what they're really talking about. So we really do think that number of the beast, if you will, was really a reference to Nero and to his name. But look, we don't know for sure. We don't have anywhere where it says this is what it means, but we do believe that that's what happened. So people using codes for people, very common. But this is why Balaam has this end and why people kind of like forget about it, because it is just a throwaway line here. It's not like there's anything else, because the next line is, that's it, it's over. And what happens in the next line is the Israelites took the women and non-combatants of the Midianite captives and seized the booty of all the beasts and all the herds and all their wealth. And they destroyed by fire all the towns in which they were settled and their encampments, which tells us that there were cities, there were towns that they lived in, but also encampments. There were also places where they lived that were not cities. They gathered all their spoil and all their booty, human and beast. And they brought the captives, the booty, and the spoil to Moses, Eleazar, and the Israelite community leadership at the camp in the steppes of Moab at the Jordan near Jericho. So again, this is just before they're about to cross over. We know that they're in this place now. Moses, Eleazar, and the priests and all the chieftains of the community came outside to meet them outside the camp. Moses became angry with the commanders of the army, the officers of the thousands and the officers of hundreds who had come back from the military campaign. Moses said to them, "You spared every female." Yet they are the very ones who at the bidding of Balaam, and there it says right there that Balaam told them to do it, induced the Israelites to trespass against Adonai in the matter of Peor, so that Adonai's community was struck by the plague. Now, therefore, slay every male among the non-combatants, and slay also every woman who has known a man carnally, but spare every female non-combatant who has not had carnal relations with a man. So this is pretty much a complete genocide. It's not quite a genocide. It's almost, I don't want anyone to say, well, it's not really, it's pretty complete. Okay. And again, Moses, you can be seen here as you know, he's a little disappointed at what they did. But basically the only people who survived were young girls. That's pretty tough. It's pretty tough to read that. And Moses, as you can see, is not happy that he had to come back. He had to be the one to tell them that. So, what's interesting about it, of course, is not that he wants the women killed because he wants to kill necessarily everybody, but he says they're actually the ones who were involved in the plague. They're the ones who induced the men to have sex with them. So it's a pretty tough scene. It's pretty much over right now, though. You shall then stay outside the camp 7 days, every one among you, or among the captives who has slain a person who touched a corpse, shall purify himself on the 3rd and 7th days. You shall also purify every cloth, every article of skin, everything made of goat's hair, and every object of wood. Eleazar the priest said to the troops who had taken part in the fighting, "This is the ritual law that Adonai has enjoined upon Moses. Gold and silver, copper, iron, tin, and lead, any article that can withstand fire, these you shall pass through fire, and they shall be pure, except that they must be purified with water of lustration. And anything that cannot withstand fire, you must pass through water." And this is essentially kind of the way we kosher things even today, which is we take things that can be burned, we burn them. Other things we can wash with water. And this is the way we kosher lots of things today to make them fit to be used in case they become unkosher, or we buy something and we have to make it kosher. On the 7th day, you shall wash your clothes and be pure, and after that you may enter the camp. Now, this destruction of the Midianite people, a lot of people don't like it because it's genocide. It's not the only time we're going to see this. We're actually going to see this. We're going to see it in the book of Samuel. We saw it in the book of Samuel when Israel went to war against the Amalekites, and Samuel, in a similar situation, tells King Saul, "You got to kill everybody." And of course, he brings the king back, and Saul loses it with Samuel, tells him, you're done, you're not going to be king anymore. And he kills the king Agag right in front of him. So it's a very similar scene. It's a scene of destruction and genocide. It's a scene where God basically tells people, you got to do away with these people completely. And there are people who really have a problem with it because it's genocidal. But we would say we're not 100% sure whether it happened, whether we wanted it to happen. I guess you could say that's pretty troubling that we even want it to happen. But it is an interesting situation where, and it doesn't happen very often, where God basically says, I don't want any of these people left in the world. The Amalekites, and at least in this scene, some of the Midianites. So it is tough. That's the end of that scene, by the way. Oh, no, not quite. Sorry. Adonai said to Moses, you and Eleazar, the priest, and the family heads of the community, take an inventory of the booty that was captured, human and beast, and divide the booty equally among the combatants who engaged in the campaign and the rest of the community. You shall exact a levy for the Adonai, and in the case of warriors who engage in the campaign, one item in 500 of persons, oxen, asses, and sheep shall be taken from their half share and given to Eleazar the priest as a contribution to Adonai. So some very small percentage goes back to the priests. And from the half share of the other Israelites, you shall withhold 1 in 50 human beings, as well as cattle, asses, and sheep, all the animals, and give them to the Levites who attended to the duties of the Adonai's tabernacle. And Moses and Eleazar did as Adonai commanded Moses. The amount of booty, other than the spoil that the troops had plundered, came to 675,000 sheep, 72,000 head of cattle, 61,000 asses, and a total of 32,000 human beings, namely the females who had not had carnal relations. That means it was a huge, huge massacre. Because if it's only the young girls that are going to survive, that means like hundreds of thousands of people were killed. Thus, the half share of those who engaged in the campaign was as follows: the number of sheep, 337,500, and Adonai's levy from the sheep was 675. And cattle came to 36,000, from which Adonai's levy was 72. The asses came to 30,500, from which Adonai's levy was 61, and the number of human beings was 16,000, from which Adonai's levy was 32. And Moses gave the contributions levied for Adonai to Eleazar the priest, as Adonai had commanded Moses. As for the half share of the other Israelites, which Moses withdrew from those who had taken the field, the half share of the community consisted of 337,500 sheep, 36,000 head of cattle, 30,500 asses, and 16,000 human beings. Now that's a lot of stuff. They're about to cross over into the land of Israel. They now have lots of stuff to start off with. Not even what they're going to get from the Canaanites when they raid the Canaanite towns. Folks, when they go into the Canaanite towns, they're essentially going to do the same thing to the Canaanites, or they're commanded to do the same thing to the Canaanites, which is destroy the cities, wipe out the people, and you can live in the cities after they're gone. Now, this is going to provide, though, an interesting situation for the people, because they wind up with lots of stuff already. And let's watch what happens. From this half share of the Israelites, Moses withheld 1 in every 50 human beings and animals, and he gave them to the Levites who attended to the duties of Adonai's tabernacle, as Adonai had commanded Moses. The commanders of troop divisions, and officers of thousands and hundreds, and officers of hundreds approached Moses. They said to Moses, your servants have made a check of the warriors in our charge, and not one of us is missing. So we have brought as an offering to Adonai such articles of gold as each of us has come upon: armlets, bracelets, signet rings, earrings, and pendants, that expiation may be made for our persons before Adonai. And Moses and Eleazar accepted the gold from them, all kinds of wrought articles. All the gold that was offered by the officers of thousands and officers of hundreds as a contribution to Adonai came to 16,750 shekels, which is a huge amount of money. But in the ranks, everyone kept his booty for himself. So Moses and Eleazar And the priests accepted the gold from the officers of thousands and hundreds and brought it to the tent of meeting as a reminder in behalf of the Israelites before Adonai. And that chapter 31 is the campaign against the Midianites. People don't like reading it. People don't like talking about it. People are amazed by the level of detail and the level of inventory here. But you can guess that for us, obviously there's a lesson here, which is that when God commands you to go to war, you follow it. When God commands you to set aside the booty for the priests or to destroy the everything, it better be followed. And that actually happens in the next book, the next part of the Bible, in the book of Joshua, the sixth book, if you will, of the Bible. They go to war against the Canaanite group that that Joshua told them to destroy. They don't destroy everything, and the people end up getting punished for not destroying everything. So following God's directions in war is also very important. We're going to see some of the directions of war coming up in the book of Deuteronomy. There's an entire section of the book of Deuteronomy, which are the laws of going to war, which are kind of more general or broad. In some of these situations like this one, I will say, as I already said, this is a unique situation where God commanded Moses in this action against the Midianites to do this. Again, people are bothered by it. And there's obviously reasons why people over time have had a hard time with this. Now, this chapter also sets up this chapter, which is a scene from the Bible that I will show you on a map in just a moment. What is going on here? So the people wind up with lots of stuff already. Let me just show you one thing. Oh, I'll bring that up in a second. Second. So let us take a look at what happens in chapter 32. The Reubenites and Gadites owned cattle in very great numbers. Noting that the lands of Yazar and Gilead were a region suitable for cattle, the Gadite and Reubenite leaders came to Moses, Eleazar the priest, and the chieftains of the community and said, Atarot, Dibon, Yazer, Dimra, Heshbon, El Alek, Sabam, Nebo, and Baon, the land that Adonai has conquered for the community of Israel, is cattle country, and your servants have cattle. By cattle country, what are they talking about? Well, they're talking about areas that are large enough to pasture flocks in. This is the land of Israel. These are the tribal portions that will be given to Israel, were the promised land, if you will. And this, as you can see right here, are the tribes of Manasseh, Gad, and Reuben. Why am I showing you this already? Well, I want you to see that the tribes are coming forth to Moses and saying, we want to have this area. Well, as you can see, they're going to get their way. But if you look, this area is in modern day Jordan, exactly. And what's interesting about this is that this area in the land of Israel, because Israel does, this area right here is a very fertile part of the center part of Israel. It's beautiful. There's a lot of kibbutzim here, but it's still a very narrow area. It's not a very great area for pasturing large animals, especially cattle. But this area over here it's an area where you can, again, have lots of head of cattle walking around grazing and not worry about having them be in an area where it's too confined and there's just not enough room. There really is not a lot of really good pasture land in the land of Israel for large animals, which is why, for the most part, the only animals that used to really be kept in the land of Israel as flocks were goats and sheep. But this area here, at least during the time of the Bible, was an area for pasturing larger animals like bulls, cows. Now, today, it's not. If you went to Jordan today, and some of you did go to Jordan just a couple months ago, you can see the area is pretty deserty. Now, it wasn't always as deserty. Well, how do we know that? Well, we actually read yesterday in the book of Jeremiah, the jungles of Jordan, the Gaon Yarden, which there definitely are no jungles in Jordan. But it tells us that at least during the biblical period, this area when the Jordan River was wider, that this area, especially here, was a very fertile area. And this is the area that the tribes where they want to pasture and they want to be able to have their flocks in. So there's enough water, there's enough land for the animals to live in this land. So this area, especially here, the area of southern Golan, has areas where the larger animals can pasture. So today there is some cattle up here and some cattle here in the Golan today even. But again, most of the land of Israel is not given over to large flocks. Almost all the meat that's brought in from outside in Israel. There's not a whole lot of cows that are raised there. We are on this trip in July going to a steakhouse. So for those who were there in February, who didn't get to go to the steakhouse, you'll have to go back and go to Habo Cream, which means that, bless you, the place of the cows. Habo Cream is the cow place. It's in the Galilee. It's in the northern Galilee. What am I going to eat? It says that they have vegetarian stuff there. I'm just telling you. It says they have a vegetarian menu, which I believe, but it is going to. It's John. It is. Well, filet is not kosher, so they don't have filet. It's not a kosher cut, but this is the. I have been there before, and I think I have eaten when I did eat meat. I did eat the. It does. Okay, so this is Habo Cream restaurant, which you can go to the next time you're in Israel. You can go to. It's not near anything. It's not really there. There you go. So for those who really like, I have been there. Let's see what it is. A solid restaurant, and where restaurants are thin on. Yeah, because there's just not a lot of. Yeah, it says it's technically in the Golan. I think it's I guess it's right on the border between Golan and the Galilee. But yeah, it's a you can also stay there too. It's like a dude ranch. Yeah, it's a dude ranch. It's a dude ranch. I think I actually stayed there one night years and years ago. So anyways, the people say to these tribes say to Moses, hey, it would be a favor to us, they continue, if this land were given to your servants as a holding, do not move us across the Jordan. So Moses replied to the Gadites, are your brothers to go to war while you stay here? Why will you turn the minds of the Israelites from crossing into the land that Adonai has given them? That is what your fathers did when I sent them to Kadesh Barnea to survey the land. You're creating chaos amongst the people. Remember the incident of the spies? Exactly, so remember the incident of the spies? You're going to now get everyone scared to go across. You want to stay here? And he tells them, if you don't cross over, that means the rest of the Israelites have to fight without you. You can't opt out. You can't stay here. And they said, but we conquered this area. We got this land. Don't you think we should stay here? And here's what Moses says. So here's continue. After going up to Wadi Eshkol and surveying the land, they turned the mind of the Israelites from invading the land that Adonai had given them. Thereupon Adonai was incensed and swore, none of the men from 20 years and up who came out of Egypt shall see the land that I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, for they did not remain loyal to me. None except Caleb, son of Yefuneh, the Kenizzite, and Joshua, the son of Nun, for they remain loyal to Adonai. So there's again the whole thing about the spies. Adonai, incensed at Israel, made them wander in the wilderness for 40 years until the whole generation that had provoked Adonai's displeasure was gone. And now you, a breed of sinful fellows, have replaced your fathers to add still further to Adonai's wrath against Israel. And you're no better than your parents, because now you're getting people to not want to go. All right. And the note here again is simply, again, members of the community. It's just people who should know better. If you turn away from God, who then abandons them once more in the wilderness, you will bring calamity on all the people. And then they stepped up to him and said, we will build here sheepfolds for our flocks and towns for our children. And we will hasten as shock troops in the van of the Israelites until we have established them in their home, while our children stay in the fortified towns because of the inhabitants of the land. We will not return to our homes until the Israelites, every one of them, are in possession of their portion. And so they say, we'll go over, we'll fight, let our kids stay here, which, you can guess why. And we'll fight, Every tribe will get their portion over there, but then we get to come back here. John. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. So, so the word that they use here, is the reason they call it a van. I don't know what your translation say. What's yours, Glory? What does it say? It's verse 17. Verse 17. And we'll hasten as shock troops in the van. Yeah, verse 17. Well, let's get Mary's King James first. What does yours say? What does yours say? It's verse 17. It's shock troops in the van of the Israelites. Yeah. What does it say? Before? Before. Ready, armed, before the. Yeah. And so what does yours say, Glory? Yeah. So the word lifnei means before, right? But the word nechalates is the word we use for chalutzim is like pioneers. We'll be on the forefront of it. The word van here is vanguard, right? And it's actually the reason they didn't use vanguard is because it sounds not really like what it is, which is the piercing, the pierce of the the top of the spear, right? The spear on the, what do they call it, John? What do they call it? Tip of the spear, right? You know, the spear. That's 2,500 years. Well, the word that they use for it is essentially saying, and again, interestingly, Israel resurrected these words when they became a modern army, that this idea of who's going to go in first becomes again, which it is in other militaries too. I'm not going to say it's not. Marines as well, right? They would be the first to be the first. So that's what they're saying. We'll be at the front of the troops. We'll be the tip of the spear. We'll be the first in harm's way, right? But let our family stay behind, and we'll come back afterwards. And he said, and they say, we will build sheepfolds for our flocks and towns for our children. Right? So let us take care of this stuff now. Let us build these things over here on the other side of the Jordan River, and we'll go over with you. Okay. So we're not going to abdicate our responsibility. We were going to do it. And he says, we will do it. Yeah. Yeah. So a wadi is literally like a river bed that could be water, but oftentimes isn't. It's a dried riverbed. It's like an arroyo. It is our arroyo, but we don't really have a good word for it in English. It's a riverbed, but it can oftentimes not be a river. So that's what it is. So these are oftentimes the borders between areas, between countries, will be the wadi. They'll say the wadi here, that's the natural border between the places. So, and he says, but we will not have a share with the territory beyond the Jordan, for we've received our share east of the Jordan. So they're basically saying, we're not going to claim any of that land. We'll go back to our homes. Now, again, they know that this area is actually, it's a better area, but they're saying to some extent, but we'll fight for that area and we won't even claim any of it, but just let us stay here. And so this was not part of God's original plan, which means that at least in the way that it was supposed to be, these tribes were supposed to be over here. Now you see there's a Manasseh in both of these. We'll get to that in a second. But you can see that originally these tribes of Gad and Reuben were all supposed to be over here amongst the rest of the tribes. So whatever happened, these tribes, we know what happened. They ended up conquering land over here before they crossed over. We read about the wars of Sihon and Og, that these countries went to war against us. We took their land. We read about that about 10 chapters ago. We took that land. We wound up with that land. Remember, the Ammonites and the Moabites said, that's our land. And we say, hey, wait a second. No, it's not. This is our land. We took it. You didn't live there at the time. You weren't in control of it at the time. We took it from the Canaanites, because it says that Sihon and Og were Canaanites who were in power here. The Ammonites and Moabites were not. You can see here Ammon and Moab, who, wanted to be here and maybe felt that that was their land, they were not in control of it. So this becomes our land. And now these tribes are saying, let us keep that land. They want to keep that land. And so their proposal is, we'll go fight with you. Like you said, Moses, you're right. So Moses said to them, if you do this, if you go to battle as shock troops at the instance of Adonai, and every shock fighter among you crosses, and again, here it says, kol chalutz. That is the word we use for pioneer in Israel. The chalutzim were the pioneers. That's the word that we use today for a pioneer. Not so much a soldier necessarily even, but a pioneer. If you go across, right, at the instance of Adonai until God has personally dispossessed the enemies and the land has been subdued at the instance of Adonai, then you shall return, right? Then you return, you shall be clear before Adonai and before Israel, and this land shall be your holding, Adonai. But if you do not do so, you have sinned before Adonai, and know your sin will overtake you. Build your towns for your children and sheepfold for your flocks, but do what you have promised. Now, it has been pointed out that Moses just did a reversal. And it's an interesting reversal. It's not one that goes unnoticed by us as we read the text carefully. The people said from Gad and Reuben, originally said to Moses, let us build sheepfolds for our flocks and towns for our children. But when Moses turns around and tells them what to do, he says to them, build towns for your children and sheepfold for your flocks. So you can see Moses teaches them what the priority is. You don't worry about your flocks, you worry about your kids. So he flipped it. And the rabbis point out that that's our priority. Our priority never should be our wealth. It should be our family. You take care of your kids first. You make sure they're protected, and then you take care of your flocks. So he says it's okay. If you do this, yeah, you can do that. Now, again, it's a great deal for the rest of Israel, because the rest of the tribes are more than happy because they get to have more land to themselves. Because if some of the tribes get to stay on the other side of the Jordan River, it means more land for us. So everybody should have been happy about this, except there's one really big problem. Not being on the other side of the Jordan River puts those other tribes at a serious disadvantage, and it puts them in a seriously vulnerable situation. And guess what? They were the first tribes that were exiled. When the Assyrians came through, those tribes were obliterated and they were gone immediately. They did not have the strength of being on the other side of the river. Now, again, those tribes ended up getting exiled as well. So it wasn't like they were protected, but they were protected for longer. They put themselves in a seriously more vulnerable situation than they would have been otherwise. And that's what they did. And so the Gadites and the Reubenites answered Moses, your servants will do as my Lord commands. Our children, our wives, our flocks, and all of our livestock will stay behind in the towns of Gilead. All your servants, all those recruited for war, cross over at the instance of God to engage in battle as my Lord orders. Then Moses gave instructions concerning them to Eleazar the priest, Joshua son of Nun, and the family heads of the Israelite tribes. And why did he do that? Because he's not going to be around much longer. So he tells the people that are left behind, this is the agreement we made. Make sure they follow it. And when they follow it, they've done what they said, and they can live there. And Moses said to them, if every shock fighter among the Gadites and the Reubenites crosses the Jordan with you to do battle at the instance of Adonai, the land is subdued before you, you shall give them the land of Gilead as a holding. But if they do not cross over with your shock troops, they shall receive holdings among you in the land of Canaan. They don't wipe them out. They don't lose everything. They have to live over there with you. The Gadites and Reubenites said in reply, whatever Adonai has spoken concerning your servants, we will do. We ourselves will cross over as shock troops at the instance of Adonai into the land of Canaan, and we shall keep our hereditary holding across the Jordan. So they say it in front of the next generation of leaders too. So the agreement wasn't just with Moses, it was with the people that were going to take over after he was gone. So Moses assigned to them, to the Gadites, the Reubenites, and the half tribe of Manasseh, son of Joseph, the kingdom of Sichon, king of the Amorites, and the kingdom of King Og of Bashan, the land with its various cities and the territories of their surrounding towns. And so that's how they wound up with this land. That's how we wound up with these territories. And you can see the tribe of Manasseh winds up getting some land too. Why? Well, because they probably were too big of a tribe just to have land over there too. So even though they didn't ask for it, they got it too. So that is the land of the Jordan that comes into our possession too. And you can see it's much bigger than the Golan Heights. The Golan Heights is only the northern part of this. It goes to about here. That's the Golan. It also includes part of, well, you can see right here. I mean, this is essentially where Amman is today in Jordan. So this is a good chunk of Jordan would have been under what we call the Promised Land. And by Promised Land, this is the land that, you know, that we had even before you can make the argument, even before we had Canaan, we had this area. This was actually our territory before we even entered the land. So that's what it says. And it says the Gadites rebuilt Dibon, Atarot, Aror. And again, these are all the towns in that area that we just saw. Atarot, Shofan, Yazer, Yogbecha, Bet Nimrah, Bet Haran as fortified towns or as enclosures for flocks. The Reubenites built Heshbon, El Ale, Kiriatayim, Nebo, Baal Meon, some names being changed, and Sibmah. They gave their own names to the towns that they rebuilt. The descendants of Machir, son of Manasseh, went to Gilad and captured it, dispossessing the Amorites who were there. But it says that again, at least maybe there were still some Canaanites that were living in this area up here. You can see right here, the Golan, it's the Sea of Galilee. This area up here. In the biblical period, it's called Gilad. It's not called the Golan Heights. It's called Gilad. And so Moses gave to Gilad, the son of Machir, son of Manasseh, and he settled there. Yair, son of Manasseh, went and captured their villages, which he renamed Chavot Yair, which literally, as you can see, means the villages of Yair. That's how the place got the name Chavot Yair. And Nobah went and captured Kenat and its dependencies, renaming it Nobah after himself. That is the end of Matot when it's read as a single portion, the end of chapter 32. So that's the first part of it. And that is how we wound up with those areas. So chapter 31 is the war against the Midianites. Chapter 32 is the division of the promised land, the Jordanian side. And now we're going to go into another idea here in chapter 33. And it's here that we're going to read this right here. We're going to read this journey right here, which is the journey that we made from Egypt up to where we are right now. This is where we are right now, on this side of the Dead Sea. So you can see this is Kadesh Barnea. This is where the incident of the spies happened. This is where we are for the last 38 years. Here's how we cross over into the land of Moab in the book of Numbers, Ammon and Moab, and into this area. And that's where we're going to cross over. So now we're going to read this journey. So Maseh literally means Ele Maseh. These were the marches, which is not what the translation will be in your translation, Glory. What does yours say? The beginning of 32. What does it say? This is the journey, or this is the 33. Yes. Yes. And what does the King James say, Mary?
When brought forth out of the land of
But what does it say of these were the what? The journeys, yeah. So the word Maseh has more of a sense of journey, which is why yours said stages of the journey, yours said journey. Maseh has its root, the idea of a journey, a travel. So when we say today, before someone goes on a trip, especially going to Israel, we say Nesiat Tova, may you have a safe journey. So the word Maseh literally means a journey. So look, the reason that they use the word marches in our translation is because there was a sense that this was more of a military march than it was a trip, a fun trip. Why? Because if you look at the next line or the rest of the line, it says this is the way they marched out, or they, again, translation is march. These are the marches of the Israelites who started out from the land of Egypt, troop by troop, in charge of Moses and in the charge of Moses and Aaron. So how do they translate the word troop? What does yours say, Lori? Does it say troop? Let's see. Uh-huh. And what does yours say, Mary? Divisions? What does the King James say for troop? Does it say host? Armies. Okay, so they use the military idea. Now, this is us. This isn't the military. This was the people. These were the hundreds of thousands or millions of people that came out of the land. It wasn't just the army, but they call it the host or the army, the tseva, which in Hebrew, it's svotam, which is the word for army, which is why they use the word march, because they use the term troop by troop. So was that because they were led by the army, or is that because it was more of a military organization where they set up the tabernacle and they broke it down and they marched by tribe, where they were marching under a flag like a division? I don't know. But we use the word tseva today. That's what an army is. The Israel army is it's the tseva, it's the tseva Haganah, the Israel. This is the Israel Defense Forces. So the sense of force, and we say Adonai Tzvaot, the Lord of the hosts, the heavenly hosts. So it's definitely a division. It's definitely has a sense of organization, which is why they translated it as marches. Yes, John.
Personally, I appreciate the review, but why?
What? Why is the journey in the Bible?
Review.
Why do you think? Why would you say, so you don't think it's necessary? Correct. So they wanted people to know that this was a journey. And well, let's see what happens. As they're reading the journey, as we're reading the march, here's what it says. Moses recorded the starting points of the various marches as directed by Adonai. So Moses recorded it, but it was under the direction of God. He wrote it. It says he wrote it, but it was written under the command of God. So this is God's direction. They set out from Ramses in the first month, on the 15th day of the first month, the night of Passover. It was the morrow of the Passover offering that the Israelites started out defiantly. Now, I don't know, you see the note here, it says defiantly, with an upraised arm, with Biad Ramah. They put up their hands and they were like a sign of victory. Offering, Passover offering, the Israelites started out defiantly in plain view of all the Egyptians. So all the Egyptians could see them. And again, that's what the King James will say, in front of the eyes of every Egyptian, right? Or what does it say? In the sight of all Egyptians, yeah. So they saw it. Every Egyptian saw it. It was right in the middle of the day, right? The Egyptians, meanwhile, were burying those among them whom Adonai had struck down. Every firstborn, and a question of male, kol bachor, whereby Adonai executed judgment on their gods. And that is the way the book of Numbers says we left Egypt. Now, it's interesting because it's in the book of Exodus. You can turn back and see what had happened. It's not really different. It's not necessarily different from that, but it's interesting to see what we said a couple books later about how we left. Number one, we left in plain sight and plain view, which it does say, but here it's definitely emphasized that everybody saw it happen. All the Egyptians saw it happen. And the way the Bible tells it here, they were still burying their dead while we were walking out. They literally were digging graves and we walked right past them, defiantly. So that is a very dramatic way of saying that we left. It didn't just say we left. So when you want to know, like, John, what's the point of this? It's to tell people, this is the way God took us out. And what's the biggest point of this maybe? That God executed judgment on their gods. That these plagues were not just against the people, they were against the Egyptian gods. To make sure that everybody who would think the Egyptian gods are the most powerful gods, they're nothing. That's what it says. That it was God's judgment against their gods. That's what it says. So this isn't just against the Egyptian people, it's against their whole culture. It's against their theology. It's against their belief system. It's against everybody who worshiped the Egyptian gods or who looked up to the Egyptians as the authority. No, that's not the case at all. And we walked out defiantly while they were still burying their dead. It's a very graphic scene.
This scene could not be put in the movie.
No, because it's too upsetting.
Right.
It's too upsetting by our standards even, but it's a very powerful scene. It's a very powerful scene when you see it as a backdrop against not just the fact that they're Egyptians. For us, when we see it, we go, ah, they're the Egyptians. They had a beautiful, they had beautiful statues and pyramids and gold and all this stuff. They were the most advanced nation by far in those days. And so for us to literally take down the most advanced nation and to walk out while they're burying their dead, there's nothing more dramatic than that. And when this was written, no matter when it was written, even if it was written 500 years later, the Egyptians were still, if they weren't, let's say this was written during the Babylonian Assyrian period, maybe. I don't think it was, but let's say it was. Even during that period, the Egyptians were still pretty impressive. They were still not at their height anymore, but they were still a rival to the Babylonians and the Assyrians. So this was a major statement that we as Israelites walked out while they were burying their dead. Pretty dramatic scene. So that's the way we left Egypt. We set out from Ramses and encamped at Sukkot, which again means tabernacles, right? It means tents. They set out from Sukkot and encamped at Etam, which is on the edge of the wilderness. So normally we're just going to they went from point A to point B. Normally that's all we get. And again, to show you the map again, it basically saying, here's where we started. We started at Ramses, we made it to Sukkot, we made it to these places. See the question marks because we're not really sure that this was exactly where it was, but if we assume that, we started out here on this side of the Sea of Reeds, we cross over here, which we're about to do. So let's take a look. They set out from Etam and turned towards Pi Hachirot, which faces Baal Tzafon, and encamped at Migdol. They set out from Penei Hachirot and passed through the sea into the wilderness. And they made a 3 days journey into the wilderness of Etam and encamped at Marah. Now, it says right there, they passed through the sea. So lest you think that it's not on there, it is on there. Crossing the Red Sea is there. But it doesn't seem like a big deal. It doesn't seem like by that point, we passed through the sea. It's a pretty big scene.
4 words.
Yeah, and that's it. That's it. So
How did that become?
well, it definitely is big in the book of Exodus. When we read it in the book of Exodus, it's 2 chapters. It's a big part of it. So here, it barely merits mention, even though when we saw the leaving of Egypt was a big deal. Now, you can make the argument, this is a journey. This is the triptych, right? This is the Israel's triptych. It's not going to give us everything that happened in that place. So it does recognize that it happened. But again, it doesn't seem to be the agenda here of talking about what happens in every single place, even though, again, you can make the argument that this is one of the biggest things that ever happened. This is the biggest public miracle that ever happened, was crossing through the sea. So it definitely says that we went B'toch Hayam. B'toch Hayam means we went through the sea. It doesn't mean we walked around the sea. B'toch Hayam means we walked under the sea. We walked through the sea. I don't know Glory, what does your translation say? Pass through the sea.
And pass through the sea.
Yeah.
Into the desert.
Yeah, it doesn't mean we just walked across it. Mary, is that what yours says? What do they say? Of the sea, which is a fair thing to say, because B'toch Hayam literally means through the sea, right? It means through the middle of the sea. So B'toch Hayam does have a sense of like it walk right through the middle. So that's not a bad translation, because it doesn't say we crossed the sea, which could be on a bridge. B'toch Hayam means we walked through where the water was. Okay, we walked through the sea. So it says they came out from Marah and to Elim, and there were 12 springs in Elim, 70 palm trees, and they camped there. I mean, you can make the argument. It just gave us more detail about Elim than it did about the crossing the sea. 12 springs in Elim and 70 palm trees. They set out from Elim and encamped by the Sea of Reeds. And they set out from the Sea of Reeds and encamped in the wilderness. And they set out from the wilderness of Sin and encamped at Dophah. And again, why does it say Sea of Reeds here? And then Then they're in the wilderness of Sin, because probably, again, if we look at the journey that they took, they crossed the sea here. This is where they go Betoch Hayam, in the midst of the sea. And down here is where they move away from the sea. So up until this time, they're kind of along the Sea of Reeds, or the Red Sea, and then they cross over and they start going through the desert. The wilderness of Sin, which again is where Mount Sinai is about to be. So that's where they move inland, is right at that point. So moving away from the Sea of Reeds, they come to the wilderness of Sin, Bamidbar Sin, which is near Sinai. They set out from the wilderness of Sin and encamped at Dophkah. They set out from Dophkah and camped at Alush. And from Alush, they encamped at Rephidim. It was there that the people had no water to drink. And we read about what happened at Rephidim, where they were attacked actually by the Amalekites. It doesn't talk about it here, but it did happen in the book of Exodus. We read about the Amalekites attacking us when they attacked the rear of our group, not the vanguard. They attacked the women and children in the back. And that's why we don't like the Amalekites, because they attacked us here at Rephidim. But there it says Rephidim doesn't talk about it there, which gives us again the impression that we're not going to get a lot of detail about what happens on this journey. It's from point A to point B, B to C, C to D, etc. They set out from Rephidim and encamped at the wilderness of Sinai. They set out from the wilderness of Sinai and encamped at Kibrot Hatava. They set out from Kibrot Hatava and encamped at Hatzerot. Now, it didn't say anything about Mount Sinai. It said nothing about getting the 10 Commandments. It said nothing about the year that we spent at Sinai. Right there, it didn't. That's where it would have been. So I wanted you to see that. So it is not the intention of this author to do anything other really than to do a map. It's really not the purpose of this author to do anything other than to tell us how we got to these different stages, how we made our journey. It is not the concern of repeating everything that we had before. So to answer your question, John, this is really the details of the journey stripped away, if you will. Stripped away to give people a visualization of what that journey looked like without there being the details and without you going off the rails going, hey, but wasn't that where we were attacked by Amalek? Isn't that where we got the 10 Commandments? Isn't that where? Look, I'm giving you a map. I'm giving you a route. Picture it in your head. This is the way we went. And so it would be the same as if you're telling somebody, I'm going to tell you about my journey across the country. Well, if you tell them about every stop that you made and every hotel that you stayed at and every restaurant you stayed at, you're going to be here for a few hours. I'm going to show you the pictures. I'm going to do all that. That's what we had in the whole book of Numbers. That's what we had really, book of Exodus and the book of Numbers. Again, Leviticus doesn't function that way. It's really telling us about the laws. There's no journey. There's no movement. We're at Mount Sinai when Leviticus opens, and when Leviticus ends, we're at Mount Sinai. But Exodus, we got from Egypt to Mount Sinai. And from Numbers, we pick back up and we go from Mount Sinai to here. But it happened over 30-something chapters in Numbers. How do we remember where we went? This just gave us, chapter 33 just gave us the map. And so that when you sat down with somebody and said, well, how did you get from California to New York? Well, in one way, you're going to tell people, well, here's my pictures. I'm going to show you my photo log. Then somebody says, no, I don't want to know that. Did you take the northern route or did you take the southern route? Did you go through Texas or did you go through Montana? And that's what this is. This is just tell me where you stopped or what was the route that you took. Did you come up through the Appalachians? Did you go around? Did you go up the coast? Did you come up that's what this is. That's all it is here's the map. Exactly. It's a triptych. You literally flip the page and go, oh, okay, there. But I'm not going to tell you about everything that happened. And that's all this is. This is one chapter. Bang, 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 which is why we don't have these details. We don't have anything here at Mount Sinai. So we went out from Kibrot Hatava and camped at Hatzerot, and this is where the whole situation with Miriam happened. They set out from Hatzerot and camped at Ritma, from Ritma, Ramon Perez, from Ramon Perez at Libnah, from Libnah to Risa. They set out from Risa and camped at Kehelat. They set out from Kehelat and camped at Mount Shefer. They set out from Mount Shefer and encamped at Haradah. They set out from Haradah and encamped at Machelot. They set out from Machelot and encamped at Tachat. set out from Tachat and encamped at Terah. They set out from Terah and encamped at Mitkah. They set out from Mitkah and encamped at Hashmonah. They set out from Hashmonah and encamped at Moserot. They set out from Moserot and encamped at Bnei Yakan. They set out from Bnei Yakan and encamped at Hor Hagidgad. They set out from Hor Hagidgad, and it's hard to say because in Hebrew it's Hor Hagidgad. It is a two-named or whatever, three-syllable name, and encamped at Yotbat. They set out from Yotbat and encamped at Abrona. They set out from Abrona and encamped at Etzion Geber. They set out from Etzion Geber and encamped in the wilderness of Zin, that is Kadesh. And from Kadesh, they encamped at Mount Hor on the edge of the land of Edom. And that's how we wound up in this spot right here. That's how we wound up coming up here through Edom and through the east. And coming up this direction instead of coming up through this direction, which is the way we should have come up. That's the way we're supposed to come up. But there's not really an explanation here about why that happened, which of course we read about in the story of the spies, the incident of the spies. But again, when we come up this direction from Kadesh, camped at Mount Hor, at the edge of the land of Edom, and it says, and Aaron the priest ascended Mount Hor at the command of Adonai and died there in the 40th year after the Israelites had left the land of Egypt on the first day of the 5th month, which again would place us in those days roughly around August. So that's really kind of the end of how we got to where we are, which is where Aaron was buried. Aaron was 123 years old when he died on Mount Hor. And again, we know he's 3 years older than Moses, so he actually lives 3 years longer than Moses, because Moses is about to die now too. So again, here's where we get definitive evidence or whatever, the definitive comment that Aaron is 3 years older than his brother. And the Canaanite king of Arad, who dwelt in the Negev in the land of Canaan, learned of the coming of the Israelites. Now here is interesting because here we read a scene that we hadn't read before, which is that, again, here in this area where Aaron died, in this eastern area, the Canaanites are starting to get a little restless because they hear about us coming across. Now, we talked about how these people, the Edomites, the Moabites, and the Ammonites, were upset that we were actually there. It says that now that this people, including this king of Arad, which you can see is right near the Dead Sea, it's not far from Masada today, that this king hears about us coming there, and what does he say? Heard of the coming of the land of the Israelites. They set out from Mount Hor and encamped at Salmona, and from Salmona they encamped at Punon, and they set out from Punon and encamped at Avot. And from Avot they encamped at Iye Avarim in the territory of Moab, and they set out from Maim and encamped at Dibon Gad. And from Dibon Gad they encamped at Almon Diblatayim, and they set out from Almon Diblatayim and encamped in the hills of Abarim before Nebo. And they set out from the hills of Abarim and encamped in the steppes of Moab at the Jordan near Jericho. And they encamped by the Jordan from Bet Yeshimot as far as Abel Shittim in the steppes of Moab. And in the steppes of Moab, at the Jordan near Jericho, Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when you cross the Jordan into the land of Canaan, you shall dispossess all the inhabitants of the land. You shall destroy all their figured objects, and you shall destroy all their molten images, and you shall demolish all their cult places. And so again, as they get to this place right here, they're about to cross over, you are not supposed to allow any of their idolatry to survive. I will show you one other thing real quick right here, which is another map. This is another map. This part of the map is pretty much the same. The reason why this map gives other possibilities of coming back on themselves is because on this map, Mount Hor is seen as being up here, whereas in our map, like based on the description that we have in this chapter, that Mount Hor seems to be down here. So that's why, based on conflicting descriptions in the Bible itself, you'll get different maps. I'm not saying that this map isn't correct. It is from the standpoint of where at least one version of this could be, but this map tries to put together both descriptions of the journey, and it requires them coming back on themselves and going up through here, rather than what we have on this map, which is that they took that route through the land of Jordan, and rather than kind of coming back on themselves through here like this, that this map has them going up through here and traveling this whole way through the Jordan, through the country of Jordan. So it's difficult to know for sure what happened. I mean, because there are two versions of it. I do like the sense that rather than coming all the way down from here and then going up this way, that they were here and then they came out through there. But it doesn't really. It's not a big difference. The distance here is about 150 miles. It's not ridiculously different whether those 150 miles were here through this area or up this area. The King's Road here was the main way of travel from Jordan along the Jordan Valley to go to the Red Sea. The other way was the way of the sea, the Wadi Maris, the Via Maris, sorry, which is the coastal route. So there was a route in the ancient world through here, and these are the ways of going through the Fertile Crescent. Or there was the King's Road, which connected all of these kingdoms along here, and it comes here in Damascus. So both routes, the sea route and the inland route, both pass through Damascus, and these were caravan routes, one that connects you to the Red Sea and one that connects you along the Mediterranean to the Nile. So again, we're not 100% sure how they came, but they definitely wind up here. In every way that we're here at the steps of Moab, near Jordan, near Jericho. So you're supposed to do away with all the idolatry when you get there. You shall take possession of the land and settle in it, for I have assigned you the land to possess. You shall apportion the land among yourselves by lot, clan by clan. With larger groups, increase the share. With smaller groups, reduce the share. Wherever the lot falls for it, that shall be their location. You shall have your portions according to your ancestral tribes. But if you do not dispossess the inhabitants of the land, those whom you allow to remain shall be stings in your eyes and thorns in your sides, and they shall harass you in the land which you live, so that I will do to you what I plan to do to them. What can I tell you? The Canaanites never get destroyed. How do we know? Because the Bible tells us it doesn't. How do we know? Because the Bible just told us it doesn't. We know from the very beginning that they don't do it. So as much as they were supposed to do it, at least the envisioning that they were supposed to do it, they don't do it. And the Canaanites continuously are a problem for the Israelites. They constantly are a problem for them, especially their idolatry. The Canaanite way of life continues to be attractive to the Israelites. Sacrifices, the gods, the child sacrifices, all of those things the Israelites continue to do for hundreds of years. And it was not supposed to be like that. At least the envisioning of what our ancestors said, it was not supposed to happen like that. They were supposed to wipe them out and not have their example. So if you say, well, it's not fair that they were supposed to wipe them out, the reason is it says that they will be a problem for you. Now, is that writing after the fact and saying, well, that's because we never got rid of them and we should have gotten rid of them? And say what you will about it. This is what happened. This is the way it played out.
Rabbi,
Yeah,
in 34, which we're about to read.
Yep.
Is this where the boundary that's delineated?
yeah, well, these will be the tribal boundaries, and we'll see it right here.
Now, fast forward and
We'll take a look. It's this map. It's this map right here that I was sharing with you here. It's this map. It's this map of the tribes. This is what we're gonna get right now. Yeah. Yep.
As we read, I always refer back to Noah's region.
Mm-hmm.
I just, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So here. So I get back to
Japhet, yeah,
Shem
and Ham. Yeah.
so now we're entering the land of Ham.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, again, was Ham supposed to be in control of this land? Remember, it was promised to Abraham, and over the last several generations while we were in Egypt, assumedly the Canaanites were in charge of this land, right?
Abraham did
No, but Abraham, so the Canaanites were already in the land, yes. Now, what is the Bible actually telling us by the fact that the Canaanites were Hamites? What's interesting about the Canaanites is, at least during this time, where we know, the Canaanites were under the sphere of influence of the Egyptians. The Egyptians are 100% Hamitic people. According to the descendants of Noah, descendants of Ham are Africans. But not, again, Black Africans. I don't want everybody to get all weird on me, because, again, we've already told you that the Bible did allow for Africans to be slaves, because it says the descendants of Ham are supposed to be your slaves in Genesis. But it doesn't say Black Africans. It actually specifically doesn't mention Black Africans. It talks about Egyptians. It talks about North Africans, and it talks about Canaanites. Why did the Bible think that the Canaanites were Hamitic? Probably because they were under the sphere of influence of the Egyptians. They were very influenced by the Egyptians. How do we know? Because we have the archaeology. We have the evidence that the Egyptians were in control of Canaan, and that they were worshiping, to some extent, Canaan. In Canaan, they were worshiping their own gods, and they were also worshiping the Egyptian gods and goddesses. But were the Canaanites themselves Hamitic? We don't know. There's not strong evidence that they were. The evidence, actually, from a cultural standpoint, from archaeologists, are that the Canaanites were probably Semitic as much as we are. Linguistically, they spoke the same language as we did. Why? Because we found their writings. We found their Canaanite writings from Lebanon and from Ugarit, which is in modern day Lebanon, and it's virtually the same as Hebrew. Genetically, we haven't found definitive genetic evidence that the Canaanites are Hamitic people. It seems like, based on the DNA tests that we've done on their bones, they're no different than us. All the evidence is pointing to the fact that the Canaanites and the Israelites were not that different.
just since we're doing a review.
Yeah.
this is one that, like, Shem,
Is our ancestor.
Semitic, right?
Yeah.
Well, but God was put Noah here, and you know, and why was everybody?
So everyone is related, and everyone, according to the Bible, is related to by Adam. The issue is, are they Hamitic people?
Hamitic.
Descendants of Ham. Are they Hamitic or Semitic or Japhet? We don't really say Japhetic, but yes, that's what it would be. Japhetics would be the Europeans.
Well, why aren't they all here? God, are you saying God decided that Noah's son Shem's descendants, Abraham, right? That okay, they created the world, created the earth, created everything's here, and I have, you can go through Genesis. I'm not an expert. I don't remember everything. Now you have Noah and his wife and on the boat, and then they get off the boat, you know, and now he's saying, you know what? Because of what Japheth did.
No, what Shem and Japhet do the right thing, and Ham does the wrong thing.
I'm choosing Shem's descendants as the chosen people,
Mhm.
and all of a sudden that's is that okay?
Yeah. So
Why
just
would
because,
it be everybody?
Well,
You're saying it was a test? Let's see how, before I decide to, right, see what I'm not understanding is, is, let's say we're all in here, right? Right, I mean,
so let's look at the scene. Let's look at the scene really quick. So it says that Noah gets out of the ark, right? It says, these are the three sons of Noah, and from these the whole world branched out. Noah, the tiller of soil, was the first to plant a vineyard. He drank the wine, became drunk, and he uncovered himself within his tent. That's Noah's problem, by the way. Noah did that. No one forced him to get drunk and get naked or whatever he did. Yes. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father's nakedness and told his two brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a cloth, placed it against both their backs, and walking backward, they covered their father's nakedness. Their faces were turned the other way, so they did not see their father's nakedness. When Noah woke up from his wine and learned what his youngest son had done, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves shall he be to his brothers." Now, what's interesting about it is he didn't even curse Ham. He cursed Canaan here. The curse should have been on Ham, but he curses Canaan. And he said, "Blessed be Adonai, the God of Shem, and let Canaan be a slave to them, and may God enlarge Japheth, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be a slave to them." And then it says Noah lived 350 years later, and Noah died. Now, this, yeah, so that's why it's here. So these are how the Canaanites got to be who they are. It seems as though the curse, based on what we have here, isn't really even against all of Ham. It's against Canaan in particular, which seems crazy because it's not Canaan who does it. It was his father, Ham, who did it. Now, as we've said before, this is the justification for African Americans to be slaves 3,000 years later. So this is a problem. This is definitely problematic. And I'm not making that, I'm not like telling you something that's my opinion. There were Protestant ministers and some rabbis who in 1840 were still telling Americans, yes, they're allowed to be slaves because the Bible told us that they're supposed to be slaves. The Bible says it, and people said that. Now, it does say not just slaves to Shem. That's the interesting thing is, it says, may God enlarge Japheth and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, which some people say is the reason why Europeans were brought into the covenant or brought, I mean, I don't want to get too into this right now, other than telling you that there are Europeans who still invoke this and say, this is why Europeans or the descendants of Europeans get to be part of the covenant or get to be part of our stuff, because it says that God enlarges Japheth and makes him part of our tents, which means not just physically, but spiritually. Being in the tent of Shem means that you're educated and part of our culture, our Semitic culture. So blessed be Adonai, the God of Shem. So again, all of this comes across as a curse against Ham. Yes, and his own grandson. Well, yeah, the rabbis say that it's maybe not just that he saw him naked, that he actually humiliated his father. When it says that he saw his father's nakedness, that he may have actually molested him. We don't know. And again, I will just tell you, since it's here and since I have it here by me, I'll show you what Rashi says about this little scene here. And again, it's a very descriptive scene. It says that they walked backwards and so they wouldn't see him naked. They do it in such a way that let me just show you, see if some of our rabbis say that Canaan saw it, right? That Canaan saw it and told his father about it, right? That's why Canaan gets mentioned here, according to Rashi, was that Canaan was the one who actually did it. So here's Rashi goes on and says that Shem devoted himself more to this duty and more eagerness than Japheth. Therefore, Shem's sons have the privilege of wearing tzitzit, whereas Japheth has the privilege to receive an honorable burial. It's kind of, that's Rashi's interpretation of it. So
he wrote it, he read in those lines back.
yeah. So shall, and it's not just him, it's actually the Midrash. He's actually quoting the Midrash. So, and then he quotes something from he quotes something from Isaiah where it talks about the king of Assyria leading away the naked exiles of Ethiopia as a punishment for what they did. So look, I'm not going to tell you that this is, I mean, you asked the question, it's a good question. Who are the Canaanites? There is another theory, by the way, that was very popular in the 60s, which builds on the idea that the Canaanites were really like us, or that we were really like them, in the sense that who were the Israelites? The Israelites were Canaanites who didn't live in the cities. So this was a really popular idea during the 60s, especially by, there's a very famous writer on this, Norman Gottwald, who said that he was also a Marxist, was that what's really going on with the Canaanite and Israelite controversy and fight was that the Israelites were hill country people that were disenfranchised by the Canaanite city dwellers, and that the real fight was more of a sociological and again this dialect, this fight between the disenfranchised and the city dwellers, that it was really more of an economic confrontation than a cultural or linguistic or ethnic confrontation, or even theological confrontation. Look, it's based on partly on the archaeology. And the archaeology basically says that we never destroy the Canaanites. We didn't destroy them. There's no archaeological evidence that we destroyed the Canaanites. We found the destruction of Jericho. Turns out Jericho was destroyed, but it wasn't destroyed by us because it was destroyed earlier than we were there. There was a massive destruction of Jericho, no question about it. But there is no evidence based on the archaeological timeline that it happened during the time that it would have happened by us. That being said, in our imagination, if we had destroyed the Canaanites, then maybe we wouldn't have had the problem of dealing with them later on. But the question is, who were they? Were they us in a slightly different form? Were they a people that lived in the land originally, and then we were given permission to knock them out, which the Bible kind of tells us? Look, the Bible tells us, real importantly, John, this is the interesting thing, is that the Semitic people came from further east. The Bible tells us that Abraham was from Ur of the Chaldees, which is in Mesopotamia. And the Bible tells us that he came to the land of Canaan and his descendants were promised the land, which means to some extent, we were given permission to take this land from the Canaanites, or given permission to have this land. Whether it was supposed to be Canaanite land, we really don't know. I mean, you could make the argument that it's not really told, who gets this land, except God tells us that we get this land. But who did we take it from? It's difficult to say. But the Bible tells us that Abraham himself was a Semite, was from the descendants of Shem, and he came from Mesopotamia. So the Bible tells us that that's what happened. I don't know. I mean, I can tell you that whatever happened, and again, this is kind of in the book, when we read the source, that's kind of in the book, The Source, which is that there are indigenous people in the land of Israel who go through many cultural changes. If Abraham represented a cultural change that happened at some point where settlers from the east settled in the land of Israel and there are descendants, that's kind of what the Bible says. I'm not going to say, hey, we have the genetic evidence for it, or we have the archaeological evidence for it, but that's what the Bible says happened. So whatever we were told, this is our land, this is our portion. The Canaanites are not supposed to be there to some extent. And so let's read what happens here. We have the separation here. Instruct the Israelite people and say to them, when you enter the land, this is the land that falls to your portion, the land of Canaan with its various boundaries. Your southern sector shall extend from the wilderness of Zin alongside Edom. Your southern boundary shall start on the east from the tip of the Dead Sea. And your boundary shall then turn to pass south to the ascent of Akrabim and continue to Zin, and its limit shall be south of Kadesh Barnea, reaching Chatzar Adar and continuing to Atzmon. From Atzmon, the boundary shall turn toward the Wadi of Egypt and terminate at the sea. From the western boundary, you shall have the coast of the Great Sea that shall serve as your western boundary. And this shall be your northern boundary. Draw a line from the Great Sea to Mount Hor. And from Mount Hor, draw a line to Libot Hamat, and let the boundary reach Zadad. The boundary shall then run to Tzifron and terminate at Chatzar Enan. That shall be your northern boundary. From your eastern boundary, you shall draw a line from Chatzar Enan to Shafam. And from Shafam, the boundary shall descend to Riblah on the east side of Ain. And from there, the boundary shall continue downward and abut on the eastern slopes of the Sea of Kinneret. The boundary shall then descend along the Jordan and terminate at the Dead Sea. That shall be your land as defined by the boundaries on all sides. Now, what's interesting about that line is that it doesn't say we get the land that was given to us just now. It is different than this boundary map, because this boundary map tells us that the Jordan River is our boundary, and it doesn't include this land here in Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh. I'm just telling you what we just read was a slightly different boundary. What the boundary we just read is this boundary right here. It basically goes like this. This is the boundary. It goes right across here, goes to here. Now, I will tell you this boundary does go further north than the land of Israel today. There's no question about that. Because if you look at where the boundary is right here, the city of Tyre in Lebanon would be part of our country, which means that part of Lebanon would be under our boundary. So no matter what, any of our biblical boundaries of the land of Israel would include territory which are not part of Israel today, which under very little, almost any kind of boundary of Israel, and I will show you right now the boundary. This is what the boundary would look like if it was based on today's boundary. This is Lebanon, the boundary with Lebanon right now. This is the border with Lebanon. According to this boundary, the boundary is essentially like here. Now, the boundary, which would again give Israel southern Lebanon, does include area which would match up with where Israel's northern boundary is in the Golan Heights, because this area right here is the Golan Heights. If you went across from Tyre, that would be about where we are when we go up to the Golan, when we're in Majul Shams. That would be essentially the east to west boundary. It would almost make a straight line across here. From 1982 to about 2002 or so, Israel controlled this area right here. The southern boundary of Lebanon was under the control of the Israeli army. So interestingly, Israel did control this area after the war in Lebanon. There was some thought that Israel wanted that land, that they were going to control that land. Israel never had made any attempt to keep control of that land or settle Israelis there. That never happened. This area, ideally, they wanted to turn over to the Christian Lebanese. It never happened. They never were strong enough. And so today, this whole area is controlled by Hezbollah today. So this is now controlled by Israel's enemies and people who are devoted to destroying northern Israel. So this area is not controlled by the Lebanese army. It's controlled by Hezbollah. But you can see that if you made a straight line, it would match up right with the Golan Heights today. This is the Golan Heights today. So this would be the border of the land of Israel, roughly where it is today, which is right here. The boundary here, the southern boundary. So if you look at the boundary here, this would be the land here. Gaza Strip would be part of the land of Israel based on this. This is Gaza right here. But that's kind of the boundaries of where Israel would be based on the Bible, based on Numbers chapter 34, which we just read. So, so it says, it continues to say, now here's the corollary, if you will. Moses instructed the Israelites, saying, this is the land you are to receive by lot as a hereditary portion, which Adonai has commanded to be given to 9.5 tribes. For the Reubenite tribes by the ancestral house, the Gadites by its ancestral house, and the half tribe of Manasseh, they've already received their portions. Those 2.5 tribes have received their portions across the Jordan, opposite Jericho on the east, the Orient side, which is interesting because, of course, that's not the, let's say, the Orient side. It says on the east, but it uses 2 words for it. It uses the Kedma and the Mizracha, which are the east. Well, you got to give them, you got to say, what does the King James say for Kedma and Mizracha, for the east and the, yeah. And what does your translation say, Glory? The east on verse 15?
On the east side of the Jordan, Jericho, where the sun went.
Yeah. So the Mizrach is the area where the sun comes up, and that's what we call the east side today, the Mizrach. So when we face east in Jerusalem, towards Jerusalem, we're facing the Mizrach. We're facing the east. Again, the Orient side is not a great translation. It kind of misses, but that's what the word Orient means. It means the Eastern. It doesn't mean Asian, it means Eastern. It was the Oriental and Occidental. It was not the Orientals, like it was not seen as a, it was just Eastern. That's all it meant. Doesn't mean that today. I'm not saying it should mean that. I'm just saying that's what the word Orient means, to orient. So Adonai spoke to Moses saying, these are the names of the participants through whom the land shall be apportioned for you. Eleazar the priest and Joshua the son of Nun. And you shall take a chieftain from each tribe through whom the land shall be apportioned. These are the names of the participants from the tribe of Judah, Caleb, son of Yefunah. And that is the only two guys that survived. Joshua, right there, and Caleb. And there's Eleazar the priest, right? That's Aaron's son. These are the names again, so these are the names of each tribe. So Caleb gets to go first. He's the senior guy. From the tribe of Shimon, Samuel, son of Amihud. From the tribe of Benjamin, Elidad, son of Chizlon. From the Danite tribe, a chieftain Buki, son of Yogli. From the descendants of Joseph. From the Manasseh tribe, a chieftain Haniel, son of Ephod. And from the Ephraimite tribe, a chieftain Kemuel, son of Shiftan. From the Zebulunite tribe, a chieftain Elitzaphan, son of Parnach. From the Issacharite tribe, chieftain Paltiel, son of Azan. From the Asherite tribe, chieftain Achihud, son of Shalomi. From Naphtali, a chieftain Pedachel, son of Amihud. It was from these that Adonai designated to allot the portions to the Israelites in the land of Canaan. This is the tribal heads who are now going to help divide up the tribe itself from amongst their people. So each tribe had its own chief, its own person who would help do that. And again, the people who are really high up are, you can see Caleb is mentioned, and that even though Joshua is still alive, he's not made the head of the Ephraimite tribe. They have an Ephraimite chief, because again, Joshua would have been too partisan maybe, because he's from that tribe. So let's finish up. We're going to see if we can finish this up right now. Adonai spoke to Moses in the steppes of Moab at the Jordan near Jericho, saying, instruct the Israelite people to assign out of the holdings a portion to them, towns for the Levites to dwell in. You shall also assign to the Levites pastured land around their towns. The town shall be theirs to dwell in, to pasture, and the pasture shall be for the cattle they own and for all their other beasts. The town pasture that you assign to the Levites shall extend 1,000 cubits outside the town wall all around. You shall measure off 2,000 cubits outside the town of the east side, 2,000 on the north of the south side, 2,000 on the west side, and 2,000 on the north side with the town in the center. That shall be the pasture for your towns. The towns that you shall assign to the Levites shall comprise the 6 cities of refuge that you designate for a man who has killed someone. So what happens? The Levites get their own towns. They get towns of where they can keep their pastures amongst the tribes, because they don't get their own tribal portion. And they also get what are called the 6 cities of refuge, right? These are places where someone who's killed someone can go to. If they've killed someone, they can go to those places rather than be killed by the family of the person that they killed. This is not a murder. This is a manslaughter situation where they accidentally killed somebody. But again, how do you stay alive? By being in one of these towns of refuge. So, and there's also 42 towns in addition to those. Thus, the total towns that you shall assign to the Levites shall be 48 total with their pasture. In assigning the towns, so again, you divide them up amongst the tribes. You basically got 4 towns in each of the tribe. Well, not 4, because there's about 4 for each one. And again, what does it say? In assigning the towns for the Israelites, take more from the larger groups and less from the smaller, so that each assign towns to the Levites in proportion to the share that it receives. So again, we're going to make it fair. Each tribe, again, smaller tribes are not going to be punished by having to give up too much of their stuff. Adonai spoke further to Moses, saying, speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when you cross the Jordan to the land of Canaan, you shall provide yourselves with places to serve as cities of refuge, to which a man who has killed someone, who has slain a person unintentionally, may flee. The cities shall serve you as a refuge from the avenger, so the killer may not die unless he has stood trial before the assembly. The towns that you assign thus shall be 6 cities of refuge in all. 3 cities shall be designated beyond the Jordan, and the other 3 shall be designated in the land of Canaan. They shall serve as cities of refuge. So 3 cities go onto the Jordan side, right? Those tribes get 3 cities of refuge, and the city in the land of Israel gets 3 cities of refuge. These 6 cities shall serve as the Israelites and the resident aliens among them for refuge, so that any man who slays a person unintentionally may flee there. You cannot have any other situation for people who kill somebody accidentally, because otherwise, anyone who strikes another with an iron object so that death results is a murderer, and that murderer shall be put to death. If one struck another with a stone tool that should cause his death and death resulted, that person is a murderer. That person must also be put to death. Similarly, if one struck one with a wooden tool that would cause death, the death resulted, that person is a murderer, and that person must be put to death. It is the blood avenger who shall put the murderer to death. That is who shall put the person to death upon encounter. So too, if one pushed another in hate or hurled something at the victim on purpose and death resulted, or if one struck another with the hand in enmity and death resulted, the assailant shall be put to death. The person is a murderer. The blood avenger shall put the murderer to death upon encounter. So again, who's responsible for putting the person to death? That person's family. They were allowed to. Did it always happen? I don't know. But if a man pushed without malice aforethought or hurled any object at the victim unintentionally or inadvertently dropped upon the victim any deadly object of stone and death resulted, though not being an enemy and not seeking to harm, in such cases the assembly shall decide between the slayer and the blood avenger. The assembly shall protect the killer from the blood avenger, and the assembly shall restore him to the city of refuge to which he has fled, and there he shall remain until the death of the high priest, who is anointed with sacred oil. Now this is insane, because how long does the person have to be there till? How long do they have to wait for the punishment to pass? As long as that high priest is in office. Now remember, the person changes over when they die. It's like being the Pope. But basically saying it could be 5 years, it could be 40 years. It seems as though you could get really messed up if you got a young high priest and he could be in power for a long time, but that's how long you have to stay in the city of refuge for. The idea of the cities of refuge were there to protect people from an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth punishment. You can say it doesn't make a lot of sense, but in cultures where there is a vengeance situation, this is the only way to protect people who accidentally killed someone. You may not like it, it's the only way it works. And again, a good amount of time passes for that person to have to stay there. It could be years and years for that person to be there. You don't know, but it could be a very long time. And if the killer ever goes outside the limits of the city of refuge to which he has fled, and the blood avenger comes upon him outside the limits of the city of refuge, and the blood avenger kills the killer, there's no blood guilt. There's no punishment for killing that guy. Or he must remain inside the city of refuge until the death of the high priest. After the death of the high priest, the killer may return to his land holding. Such shall be the law of procedure throughout all the ages in your settlements. If anyone slays a person, the killer may be executed only on the evidence of witnesses. The testimony of a single witness against the person shall not suffice for a sentence of death. It doesn't mean that you can't punish the person if you only have one witness, but you can't execute somebody. There's no capital punishment if there's only one witness. You may not accept a ransom for the life of a murderer who is guilty of a capital crime. A murderer must be put to death. Nor may you accept a ransom in lieu of flight of the city of refuge, enabling a man to return to live on his land before the death of the priest. You shall not pollute the land which you live, for blood pollutes the land, and the land can have no expiation for blood that is shed on it, except by the blood of the one who shed it. You shall not defile the land in which you live, in which I myself abide, for I, Adonai, abide among the Israelite people. Now, we're going to finish one last paragraph. It's a short paragraph. As you can see, the chapter 35 had nothing to do with the previous chapter. It's the law. Well, it is from the standpoint of, hey, we're about to apportion out the land. We need to tell people they're cities of refuge. But most of it is actually not about the cities of refuge themselves, but about what the concept is behind it and why we have cities of refuge. That's chapter 35. So 30, it's all different. You have a chapter of the journey. You have a chapter we have a chapter of the war against the Midianites. We have the borders, and now we have this law of the city of refuge. And the last chapter we're going to look at, we actually already looked at, and we're going to finish up with this. And this is the scene that we go back to the daughters of Zelophehad. The family heads in the clans of the descendants of Gilad, the son of Machir, son of Manasseh, one of the Josephite clans, came forward and appealed to Moses and the chieftains, families, heads of the Israelites. They said, Adonai commanded my Lord to assign to the land of the Israelites as shares by lot, and my Lord was further commanded by Adonai to assign the share of our kinsman Zelophehad to his daughters. If you recall, I already showed this to you, but I'm going to show it to you again because it's the last part here we're going to finish with. Now, if they become the wives of persons from another Israelite tribe, their share will be cut off from our ancestral portion and be added to the portion of the tribe to which they become wives. Thus our allotted portion shall be diminished. So what happens if these daughters of Zelophehad or it happens in any other tribe, what happens if they marry outside the tribe? And even when the Israelites observe the Jubilee, their share will be added to that of the tribe in which they became wives. And their share will be cut off from the ancestral tribe. So even if we sold the land, even if we rented out the land in the land of Jubilee, it would be owned by the family that has that tribe, that was married to them. We can't have that. So Moses, at Adonai's bidding, instructed the Israelites, saying, the plea of the Josephite tribe is just. So the daughters of Zelophehad had a great point, which is, why should our family lose its portion because our dad didn't happen to have sons? But on the other hand, the rest of the tribe says, but you can't let these people marry outside the tribe. And so here's what it says. This is what Adonai has commanded concerning the daughters of Zelophehad. They may become the wives of anyone they wish, provided they become wives within the clan of their father's tribe. No inheritance of the Israelites may pass from one tribe to another, but the Israelite heirs, each of them, must remain bound to the ancestral portion of the tribe. Every daughter among the Israelite tribes who inherits a share must become a wife from someone from a clan of their father's tribe, in order that every Israelite heir may keep their ancestral share. Thus, no inheritance shall pass from one tribe to another, but the Israelite tribe shall remain bound each to its portion. That seems fair. That's a compromise. We had a challenge. That was answered. Then we had a challenge to the challenge. And that too was answered. And that's called a compromise on a compromise. The daughters of Zelophehad did as Adonai had commanded Moses. Machlah, Tirzah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Noah, Zelophehad's daughters, became the wives of their uncle's sons, which is another way of saying they married their cousins. If you want to know why Jews oftentimes married within their families, it's for this exact reason. So the property would not pass outside of the family. Becoming wives within the clans of Manasseh, the son of Joseph, and so their share remained in the tribe of their father's clan. And it says, these are the commandments and regulations that Adonai enjoined on the Israelites through Moses on the steps of Moab at the Jordan near Jericho. And that, my friends, is the end of the book of Numbers. So we went a little bit further. We went a little longer. We went 5 minutes long. But I will tell you, it was good, because to have to come back and read those last 13 verses or so would have not made a lot of sense. So the next time we reconvene in a few weeks, we will be back in July. We will read the book of Deuteronomy, the next telling, the second telling of what happened during the last chapters of our journey from Exodus through Numbers. It's the second telling. It's Moses's point of view, and it all takes place in the same place. Just like Leviticus didn't move, Deuteronomy doesn't move either. We're at the other side of the Jordan River, and everything that we read in Deuteronomy, and for those that are in our Jeremiah class, there is a theory that Jeremiah and Deuteronomy were both written, or at least edited, or put together by the same people, including this guy Baruch, this scribe. And you'll see some of the language. It's great that we're reading Jeremiah and Deuteronomy together. It's a great overlap, but it has some of the most famous parts of the Bible, including the Shema Ve'ahavta, including great chapters of law and important lessons for us, and often quoted lines from the book of Deuteronomy. So we will see everybody in a few weeks, but come tomorrow night for the board meeting, come tomorrow night for the movie, come Friday night for Rick and Addie for services. And what can I tell you?
Have a wonderful.
When we come to the end of a book, we say chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek. Be strong, let everyone be strengthened. So that's the way we come to the end of a book and give everybody extra strength. So again, I look forward to seeing you in the next couple of days. If we don't see you, we'll see you later. And Harvey's not on the line, but Harvey's going to actually be in Israel with us.
Right.
What? All right, everybody. Take care. It's good to see you all. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Bye-bye.
Have a great trip in Israel.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Bye-bye, guys.